Okay, it wasn't an absolute classic Azerbaijan Grand Prix this weekend, but it did put a spanner in the works for quite a few teams up and down the grid and made a few changes in terms of the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship that we definitely need to talk about. So here's my main three winners and main three losers from this weekend's Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And I think, again, our first winners have to be Red Bull. They just keep doing it nowadays. And Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen come home victorious. Max Verstappen in first place, Sergio Perez in second place. And that puts them in that order in the Drivers' Championship as well. Sergio Perez jumping in front of Charles Leclerc into second place. And it was a very comfortable victory in the end for Max Verstappen. He got an incredible start, by the way, which I think was underplayed because Sergio Perez was able to jump in front of Charles Leclerc. But Max, by far and away, the better driver over the course of the race this weekend and had just much better race pace than Sergio Perez. Checo dropped off after the virtual safety car, unfortunately for him. And we'll never see those two Red Bulls race each other. I know there's controversy again about Red Bull talking on the radio, saying no fighting, please, to Max Verstappen, to Sergio Perez. But let's face it, Max Verstappen was a hell of a lot quicker than Sergio Perez. Got past pretty much on merit. There's not too much that Sergio Perez could have done, even if he was allowed to defend a little bit more harshly from Max Verstappen over the course of the weekend. And we saw them play it a little bit safe. The Constructors' Championship is still something that they have in mind. 279 points now, eking out a much bigger lead over Ferrari. 80 points is a huge gap for the Ferrari team to try and get into. And to be honest, I don't think that we can really talk about Red Bull fully without talking about my first losers of the weekend as well, which has to be Ferrari. Like, there's no other way of putting it. Ferrari are by far and away the biggest loser from this weekend in Baku. Just look at where those two cars finished, 19th and 20th place. Both cars not finishing the race, both cars having technical issues, and it's just all going wrong for Ferrari in the last couple of races or so. Let's delve into Carlos Sainz first, because Carlos Sainz probably the one of the two that it matters for least, which is very harsh to say, but still in fifth place in the Drivers' Championship, still 16 points now off of George Russell, and it's just continuing to pile on the pressure in Carlos Sainz. It looked like he was going to get a little bit of momentum behind him. It looked like he was maybe going to finish in fourth. I don't think he was really going to bother Sergio Perez or Max Verstappen in front of him, maybe not even Charles Leclerc either, but it's just Carlos Sainz, 3 DNFs so far this season, and it feels so harsh because the 5 races that he has finished, he's finished inside the top 4 every single time. So you can actually say when he is finishing Grand Prix, he's doing exactly what he should be, and he's getting the points that Ferrari are deserving with those performances, but he's just not finishing enough races. As I said, 3 DNFs so far this season, another one in Baku, and now we're looking at Ferrari. Now it's Ferrari's fault. And it's most definitely Ferrari's fault when it comes to Charles Leclerc in the last few races. Spain, technical difficulty. Monaco made a mistake. Now here in Baku, another technical difficulty. That's 3 races in a row where Charles Leclerc's race has been ruined by something completely outside of his control. And as he gets further and further from Max Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship, as Max Verstappen is eking out even more of a lead, and as I spoke about before, Sergio Perez jumping in front of him as well, it's becoming very tricky to see how Charles Leclerc is going to keep himself in this championship. Needs something to give him a little bit more hope for that Ferrari package, but Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, if we look at it now, they've both got 2 DNFs, but Max Verstappen has 34 extra points, and it's 6 pole positions to Charles Leclerc, but only 2 wins, whereas we look at Max Verstappen, 1 pole position to 5 wins this season, and that's what makes you a champion. It's the Sunday performances. It's getting the points when it matters, and you have to say that Max Verstappen is the one at the moment who is delivering in the races. Yes, he's not got the out-and-out pace in qualifying as a Charles Leclerc, but there's no points on Saturday, as they say. And when Christian Horner is telling Max Verstappen to slow down and Sergio Perez to slow down, you know that they're having an exceptional weekend. That's why they have to be a winner, and Ferrari are by far and away the losers from this weekend. Let's delve into our second winners though, and for me that has to be Mercedes, mainly because of the consistency that they are finding this season, and the consistency of George Russell in particular is just obscene. Another 3rd place finish for him, a 2nd podium this season, his 3rd podium in his Formula 1 career, and he's just been exceptional again. Yes, he's been lucky, yes, he's had things go his way, but as he said at the end of the race, you have to be in the race to pick up the points. You have to continually finish every single Grand Prix that you possibly can and keep yourself in contention. Maybe having a slight dig at Red Bull the beginning of the season, Ferrari now having issues themselves, but Mercedes Mercedes have been there every single Grand Prix and they've been able to get it over the line every single time. And sometimes that's all you need to do, especially when it comes to the Drivers' Championship for George Russell right now. 16 points ahead of Carlos Sainz, as I said, and mainly just because he's been able to finish every single race. He's finished 3 races more than Carlos Sainz. And, you know, if Carlos Sainz is averaging, 6 points in those 3 races, which is definitely doable in that very quick Ferrari, he's then ahead of George Russell in this championship. But as it stands, George Russell is ahead of him. And actually, Lewis Hamilton had a really good afternoon too. It was nice to see Lewis Hamilton a little bit more comfortable in the car, still having trouble with the bouncing, of course. Got out of that car a little bit gingerly at the end of the Grand Prix, but a 4th place finish for him, getting a little bit of breathing room to Lando Norris in the Drivers' Championship. And the Constructors' Championship, fairly solid as well for Mercedes, basically guaranteed 3rd position. They need to get on top of the porpoising though. It's damage limitations right now, but with Red Bull getting better and better and better, Ferrari now having some issues themselves, if Mercedes can start to turn on within the next 2 or 3 races, I would say, I think they're in with a slight shout at catching up to Ferrari, possibly Red Bull, if they can really start to win races. But it needs to be sooner rather than later. And with porpoising not quite being there, it looked like Barcelona, they'd made a step forward. Then Monaco was a step back. Baku looked like, again, another step back. If we look at George Russell's times in qualifying, they're still miles off. 9/10 of Carlos Sainz, 1.4 seconds off Charles Leclerc. And that needs to change around. Mercedes need to find something soon. Otherwise, it's kind of a dead season for them. I think they'll end up in 3rd place in the Constructors' Championship, and it will kind of just mellow out to an end of a season where they take a 3rd place, they build for 2023. With that said, I'm going to double dip on Ferrari as our losers this weekend, in particular the Ferrari powered teams in Alfa Romeo and Haas, because they both had pretty dogged weekends, none of them scoring any points whatsoever. Let's talk about Valtteri Bottas and Alfa Romeo first, because he looked the closest in 11th place, possibly his worst weekend of the season though, and he himself said he just had no idea where the lack of performance went. Looked like on Friday they were going to do okay, but wasn't able to pick up any points in this one. Still sits okay, 40 points, obviously 8th place in the Drivers' Championship, but drops back a couple from Lando Norris, and, you know, the likes of Ocon, Gasly, Alonso were able to make up points behind him. So he needs to turn that around pretty quickly, and Alfa Romeo need to sort out that problem. In particular, they need to sort out the problem with Zhou, though. A 3rd DNF for the Chinese driver this year, and again, I was praising Zhou just a couple of weeks ago for his consistency, for the fact that he was just continually getting the car over the line and giving himself a nice bedding in Formula 1. If you can just continually finish Grand Prix, you put yourself in quite a nice position to then pick up points when these kind of incidents happen, when Ferraris, for instance, drop out of Grand Prix. And it looked like this was going to be the opportunity for Zhou to do so. But again, Alfa Romeo not being able to get the car over the line for the end of the Grand Prix, a 3rd DNF, as I mentioned before. It's just too many. 3 DNFs in 8 races. That's nearly 50% of the races that Zhou has missed out on. And then moving on to Haas as well. Haas now looking a little bit worse for wear in the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship. Still only 15 points, losing out massively to AlphaTauri with Pierre Gasly getting good points. And Kevin Magnussen, 2 DNFs in a row. Again, completely out of his hands. And 2 possible points finishes in Monaco and Baku for him. And he seemed a little bit frustrated at the end of the Grand Prix. No points for him since Imola now. And it's starting to look like it's drifting away a little bit from Haas and Kevin Magnussen in particular. Then finally, Mick Schumacher, I guess we can touch on. He ended up finishing the Grand Prix in 14th place, but he was absolutely miles off of it. He was super slow. Ended up about 30 seconds behind Yuki Tsunoda, I think, in the end, off the top of my head. And it felt like he was just trying to get it around the Grand Prix track without hitting into a wall. I know that I touched on Yuki Tsunoda and Zhou just being those drivers to continually get it around and give themselves a bedding this year and trying to build from that. It looked like Mick Schumacher was trying to do that. It looked like Mick Schumacher was like, if I just go 3 seconds off of the pace of everybody else, but keep it on the track, at least, you know, I won't have $1 million bill to pay at the end of it. And therefore, Mick Schumacher kind of has to go down as a loser, along with all of the other Ferrari-powered teams for me. And I guess I'm also going to double dip on Red Bull powered teams in terms of the winners this weekend. I talked about Red Bull at the top of the show. I'm going to talk about AlphaTauri now because Pierre Gasly is back, ladies and gentlemen. A 5th place finish. That is where he loves to finish. He loves 5th place, and I love seeing Pierre Gasly in 5th place. It was the best race that he's had over the course of the season so far by an absolute mile, and got over the checkered flag, and he said it himself. He said finally he's got a performance behind him that he can build from this season. Finally he's picked up some points, and he's continually been fighting for it. He's been doing okay actually when it's come to qualifying, but it's just been struggling to find that car. And you know what? If he's battling with Mercedes week in, week out from here on in, I'm absolutely fine with that. I would love to see Pierre Gasly putting it in the mix with Lewis Hamilton and George Russell a little bit more often, but he hasn't actually picked up points since Australia. It's been a little bit of a downturn for Pierre Gasly in the last few races. Needed a little bit of a rethink, and now they've completely readjusted themselves and put themselves back in contention for maybe that 5th or 4th spot in the Constructors' Championship, maybe just a little bit. Maybe that's me just being a little bit of a Pierre Gasly fanboy. Although Yuki Tsunoda also had a really, really good weekend. I know that I'm saying AlphaTauri as a winner. I think we can still see Yuki Tsunoda's race overall as a win for the team. Yes, he had that issue, the strangest issue, by the way. I don't know if I've ever seen a rear wing split in half like that. It looked like he tried to open the DRS, but it opened on one side, and then obviously they had to get the gaffer tape out. It wasn't very Formula One glitz and glamour, was it, when they were literally fixing it with tape that you have in your kitchen? But he showed great pace all weekend, and Yuki Tsunoda's looked better and better this season. I made a video on him 3 or 4 weeks ago saying that he was quietly having a really good season. I think he's still quietly having a really good season and would have picked up points this weekend, meaning that he'd have jumped from 15th place maybe up towards 10th, 11th place where Pierre Gasly and Fernando Alonso now find themselves. But overall, both drivers looking much more comfortable in that AlphaTauri car. The AlphaTauri car looking quicker and quicker and quicker. And I hope that this isn't just a one-off. I really hope that they can build off of this performance, turn this 5th place from Pierre Gasly into something special, and start to get themselves back into that conversation in that midfield pack. Which leads me to my final loser of the Baku Grand Prix. And this might be a very controversial one, considering both of the McLarens finished in the points. Daniel Ricciardo in 8th place, Lando Norris in 9th place. In the Constructors' Championship, they're looking like they've got a solid 4th position, 65 points. You know, they're ahead of Alpine by enough points right now that Alpine aren't putting them under lots and lots of pressure. Obviously, that might change in 3 or 4 races' time, but right now, McLaren look fairly comfortable in that 4th place spot. I think the reason that McLaren are a loser for me, and you've got to remember, these are my team, I'm going to be hypercritical of them. I think the radio shenanigans that we saw in this Baku Grand Prix are stupid and need to be addressed as soon as they possibly can. Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo, both of them just petulant, stupid, not working as a team, and I expected more from them coming into this season. I know that they're in such a weird position because they do have a pretty good car sometimes, and Daniel Ricciardo really hasn't had a great start to the season. We know he's been under so much pressure, and Lando Norris is definitely going to see himself as the number one in the team. But Daniel Ricciardo giving Lando Norris the hurry up towards the beginning of this Grand Prix when they were on completely different strategies. He knew that Lando Norris's medium compound tyres were kind of giving up on him, whereas he was on the harder compound, going a little bit longer, and then they used him to try and defend from the Alpines and maybe try and push Lando Norris in front of Fernando Alonso. That didn't work. Fernando Alonso kept in front of Lando Norris by quite a considerable margin actually after his first pit stop, but then it kind of flipped around. We had Lando Norris behind Daniel Ricciardo towards the end of the Grand Prix, and Lando Norris does the same thing, gives the hurry up to Daniel Ricciardo. And yes, Daniel Ricciardo's on fresh medium compound tyres, again, should be catching Fernando Alonso in front of him. But I don't think Daniel Ricciardo or Lando Norris would have got in front of Fernando Alonso at all over the course of the Grand Prix. And Lando Norris just, again, putting that pressure on the team to try and get them to swap, saying on the radio, okay, you can go in front of Daniel if you get within a second, but then you have to let Daniel pass on the last lap. Like, it just makes so much of a grey area and so much faffing with the McLaren team. I think the team dynamic for me right now is just awful. And that's why they're a loser from this Grand Prix, because people are going to be talking about that. People are already putting a lot of pressure on Daniel Ricciardo to perform. Finally, he's getting some points on the board. And actually, I'm feeling pretty negative about this weekend. Even though it's a double points finish, I come away from it thinking my team is falling apart from the inside, and they just don't have any idea how to really combat the fact that Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo both want to be the first driver in this team, and neither of them wants to lose out to one another when it comes to on track. And it's a tough dynamic to kind of get behind because they're in this no man's land, because they're in 4th place right now, because they're not under pressure from the Alpines as of yet. But when they do come under pressure from the Alpines later on in the season, if Alpine continue to improve, and McLaren are still this 50-50 car where one weekend they're absolutely phenomenal, the next weekend they're absolutely nowhere, it's really tough to take. And I don't know. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Do you think McLarens are a winner from this weekend or a loser from this weekend? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Overall, it was an exceptional Baku Grand Prix in my opinion. I really enjoyed it. There was lots of talking points, if not a great race overall. Leave a like whilst you're down there in the description. Subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I'll see you next time.